You're listening to Pitch Perfect, the podcast, not the movie. This is the second episode of our first season, The Importance of Being Earnest, and I'm your host, Nate. And joining me is my co-host, Josh, but you might know him better as the sound designer for Diary of a Wimpy Kid 2, Roderick Rules. Don't look that up.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for joining us. Faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
Look, up in the sky.
It's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's Ernest P. Worrell in a sleigh? Yes, the infamous hero is now the man of the hour. To best be in a position to use his amazing powers in a never-ending battle for truth, justice, and the American way, Ernest has assumed the disguise of a taxicab driver, a government worker, a Shirley grandma, and a snake handler? That's right. Welcome to The Importance of Being Earnest, where my co-host and I talk about Ernest's incredible legacy and how things might have been different if our hero Jim Varney hadn't returned to his home planet so soon.
Yes, of course, on this podcast, every season, we pick some category of film, be it a franchise or the oeuvre of a specific artist or a genre. We perform a survey, we watch the movies, learn what we can, and at the end, we try to pitch the perfect one. And for this season, we're tackling the Ernest franchise, and this is, of course, about the second Ernest film, Ernest Saves Christmas.
Yes, coming second chronologically, the Ernest franchise takes on everybody's favorite subject, Christmas, and how he saves it from peril.
Universally beloved concept, Christmas, is tackled in this film. We have the same director. Obviously, I think on the previous episode I mentioned that all but one of the Ernest films are directed by John R. Cherry III. Different writers this time, Ed Turner and B. Klein. And then Ed Turner additionally has a story by credit. So no Coke Sams to be found on the writing team this time.
No, but there is Coke Santa.
Yeah. Where do we want to start with this?
Well, I think let's just talk about the synopsis and go from there.
Yeah, so this is, I'm just going to say, as a preface to the synopsis, this is somehow a much less tightly plotted movie than Ernest Goes to Camp, which is not a movie that I would call tightly plotted or even notably plotted.
Yes, we go from slightly knotted to Gordian style.
Ernest is now a taxi driver in Florida, working, it seems, primarily around the airport in Orlando?
Yes. We didn't get a actual location for Ernest in Ernest Goes to Camp.
Yeah.
So, for all we know, this is a completely different area.
Yeah, I kind of got the vibe from the abundance of foliage that Camp Kikiki was in the Pacific Northwest.
Maybe.
But, I don't think they ever actually said specifically. But now we know definitively this film takes place in Orlando, Florida. Ernest is a taxi cab driver. He picks up an eccentric, bearded man at the airport. And also a runaway. A teen runaway.
Well, that's after the airport, but yes.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying, they both get into his taxi cab. And he dropped this eccentric bearded man is, in fact, Santa Claus. He's also the guy that was the voice of the Sultan in Aladdin. So, if you can imagine what the Sultan's voice sounds... Honestly, he's kind of just they kind of just squished him down and animated him for Aladdin. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. He does look a lot like the Sultan in real life.
Yeah, and it's
except he's more fit.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He's squished down. He's compressed to make the Sultan. The Sultan's denser than the real life.
Well, the Sultan's also more like Kirby-shaped.
That's what I'm saying, but it's all the mass is concentrated.
Like apple juice.
Yeah, like apple juice. Anyway, so Ernest, this guy is Santa Claus. And he's trying to find a successor to the Santa Claus legacy. And he specifically chosen this dude named Joe Carruthers, who is the host of a weekly children's show. I mean, I guess he's supposed to be like a Mr. Rogers figure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Ernest drops Santa Claus off at the studio where Joe works and accidentally steals Santa Claus's magic Santa sack that he has with him.
Well, technically, Santa leaves it in there because the key theme with Santa is that he is very forgetful.
Yeah. He's reaching the end of his time as Santa, and his mind has become fogged with centuries of memories. They don't say that in the movie, but that's my interpretation of the character.
I mean, he at one point he says 151, so maybe.
Anyway, so Ernest and this runaway have the magic Christmas sack, and they're just like hanging out. When they realize that the sack is magic, Ernest becomes convinced that he needs to return this to Santa Claus because that's the right thing to do. Meanwhile, Santa gets arrested and thrown in jail, and then Ernest and the runaway, whose name is... She initially says that her name is Harmony, but is revealed to actually be Pamela. They break Santa out of prison, and then they decide they're going to work together with Santa to convince this Joe guy to become the new Santa. But then a couple things stand in their way. One, Pamela runs off with the magic Santa sack. Two, Joe takes a job making a horror movie, and Ernest and Santa have to sneak on to the production lot. And then, eventually, some kids who won't shut up about Santa Claus convince Pamela to bring the magic Santa sack back, and Santa and Ernest get through to Joe. Ernest retrieves Santa's sleigh and reindeer from the airport customs holding facility, and Christmas is saved. Joe accepts his destiny as the new Santa Claus, Santa's relinquished of his powers, and Ernest gets to fly the sleigh twice. And we're not really given much of a resolution for Pamela's character arc. Her and Santa have a conversation where he's like, "Your mother loves you very much, please go home." And she realizes that Christmas is good or whatever and brings the sack back. But then we don't see her get reunited with her family. We just assume that's what's going to happen. It's a little bit like how the ending of Ernest Goes to Camp is kind of ambiguous as to what the future of Ernest's child sidekicks are.
Well, this is less ambiguous. I mean, maybe she maintains a connection with Ernest, who knows? But she did say that she called her mom in her moment of revelation and told her where she was and that her mom would eventually be coming to get her.
Yes. And I know what you're thinking, having listened to this synopsis, dear listener. You're thinking, kind of sounds like Ernest isn't the main character of this movie. And you're right. He's not really the main character of this movie. It's mostly about Santa Claus. Then I would say secondarily about Pamela, and then thirdly about Ernest, who doesn't really have an arc, and all he really wants is to drive things.
Yes, so taking a book straight from the future out of 2015's Mad Max Fury Road, Ernest is not the main character, but just a force of nature off to the side, getting involved in the film's main plot.
Yeah, I wish this was more like Fury Road. It does have a kind of a... Nah, it's not even really a chase sequence. It's a chase against time at the end with the sleigh.
I mean, when he's in a sleigh for the first time, he does get chased by fighter pilots who want to terminate him.
That is one of the wildest parts of the movie. The Air Force tries to kill Ernest in the air.
Well, I was going to talk more about how Santa's the main character. And we get that feeling immediately. So when we have the opening credits come up, it's nothing about Ernest whatsoever. It's just creepy, old-timey photos of Santa enjoying Coke, being a spirit in a house, and many other images that feel like they might be an opening to the Krampus movie.
Yeah, it is literally just a slideshow, essentially, of stock Santa art, many of which appear to be old Coca-Cola ads, just sort of dissolving into each other. Some of them are genuinely frightening, with Santa as a giant imposing head or whatever. Or, like you said, a spirit. There's one where, there's smoke rising above the house. That's the most Krampus-y one. Is the one where there's, smoke rising above the house and, Mufasa in the Clouds style. It is formed into the visage of Santa Claus watching over you. And, yeah, that's the opening credits. No hijinks, no Ernest, just Santa Claus. And then there's lots of long sequences in this movie of just Santa Claus that Ernest is not in at all.
Basically, it's like if this movie posed a hypothetical, what if we redid Miracle on 34th Street, but Ernest was there?
But it's also not nearly, it's not nearly as focused as that.
That is for sure, and I think that'll bring us to the section of this podcast where we rate the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. I think this is a huge step down. Maybe not a huge step down. That might be giving Ernest Goes to Camp a little too much credit. But I think this is a noticeable step down from Ernest Goes to Camp. It's less funny. It's less compelling. There's too much non-Ernest. It's, like, just generally not as charming. And I don't know if this was an issue at the time, but currently, in this age, the, like, film print that is available for this one looks significantly cruddier than the Ernest Goes to Camp one. Like, the image is just, like, more washed out and grainier, and it just doesn't look as good. Not that Ernest Goes to Camp was, like, an amazing movie on an aesthetic level, but it looked a lot more professional than this did. Mm-hmm. You could have fooled me. I know for a fact, because I've done the research. I know that Ernest Goes to School is the first straight-to-video Ernest, but you could have fooled me into thinking this was that. Just from the way it looks. Because it looks cheap.
I think that's fair.
And so I think, like, I ended up giving it... let me actually double check. But I'm pretty sure I gave it a 4 out of 10, a 2 out of 5. I think it's just pretty mediocre.
I felt the same way. You pretty much covered it. It is a step down from Ernest Goes to Camp. And it really just trades that more wholesome humor that we enjoyed for some real offbeat slapstick that does not work as well as it should. And there's a lot of uneven pacing during a specific scene, especially, that we'll talk about. But also a lot of undermining character quirks. Ernest doesn't feel as, like, wholesome and friendly as he previously did. And I think that makes it take down a step. So I'm agreeing with you on the 4 out of 10, 2 out of 5.
I might be jumping the gun here a little bit, but, like, you know, we'll talk about our list of essentials for Ernest, but there's, like, 2 of the things that we listed as essentials were chaos. The Ernest is, in essence, a force of chaos, but also that he's Gamera-like. You know, he's a noble, peaceful soul who is a friend to children, and they really amped up the chaos aspect and played down the other aspects of his character in this. This is like this Ernest is a mess. Like, he's bad in Ernest Goes to... Or he's incompetent in Ernest Goes to Camp, but most of the time he's only hurting himself. But a lot of the times in this one, his chaos is directed outward. In a way that is, I think, a lot less sympathetic than in the previous movie.
For sure. Now, before we dig deep into the characters of this movie and all their various subplots, do we want to deal with the main character of the movie first, or the secondary character of the movie first?
Let's deal with the main character.
The main character, Santa Claus. Tricked you. So, we're talking about not Ernest. I'm sorry, fellas, but here we go.
I would not say that this is one of my favorite fictional depictions of Santa Claus.
No, me either. But I get what they're going for. I mean, I understand that, like, there's some mythos behind the Santa lore, and they have to figure out ways to make it coalesce with just writing something, that Santa has an arc. So they gave him the arc of being old and forgetful and senile, and he has to pass on his powers at a certain time to a worthy soul in order to keep Christmas alive.
Yeah, but I don't like... the way I feel about a lot of things in this movie is it just doesn't go far enough for me. If his character was that he was, like, magic Mr. Magoo, I think that could have been really good. He's just kind of forgetful, though.
Yeah, but he does have certain, like, qualities that I think kind of work. One of his biggest qualities is that he doesn't seem to be able to lie, even if it's in his best interest. Because he could have easily had, like, a pseudonym and a different name than just telling everybody he meets immediately that he's Santa Claus.
And it's like, I understand that. I understand that they don't want Santa to lie because he's supposed to be this character for children and he's supposed to be like a paragon of goodness. But I also think, knowing, like, what we know about the character of Santa Claus, it kind of doesn't make sense for him to be that pure. Santa Claus sneaks about in the night and breaks into people's houses, and he spies on you. And it's for essentially a good end to reward the virtuous and punish the naughty. But, like, Santa Claus should be chaotic good in the parlance of D&D alignment. And this is a very lawful good Santa Claus, but also kind of not that good, because he's sort of a dick.
Yes, he does have some dickish moments that I wanted to bring up. First and foremost, we find out that one of the reasons that Harmony Star, a.k.a. her real name Pamela, doesn't believe or like Christmas anymore is because Santa gave her a doll instead of the baseball glove that she wanted.
Yeah. Why, Santa? Why would you do that? You knew what she wanted. He says that. It's not like she was like, why did you give me that doll instead of the baseball glove? And he was like, oh, I'm sorry. He says to her, or not to her, he says, I guess, about her. Like, oh, yes, she stopped believing in Santa Claus when I gave her that doll instead of the ball she wanted. So he knows she wanted the ball, and he still gave her the doll because, why? He's a sexist? I guess? That's not great. I don't like that.
No, it's not great. Also, I think it was a glove.
Yeah, whatever.
That's fine.
It's some sort of sports implement.
Yes.
Yeah, kind of sucks. But this is like, I don't want to get too bogged down into this, because this is that happens with every podcast that ever talks about one of these Christmas movies. But this is a problem that I have with a lot of movies. And specifically stuff like this and the Santa Claus. Which is these movies that try to set up this universe where Santa Claus exists, but, like, Santa Claus exists for real, and he delivers toys for real, but, like, people stop believing in him and stuff. Those are not reconcilable, because it just doesn't make any sense. It's like, yeah, in real life, lots of times, children don't get the gifts that they want. Or children don't get the gifts they want because of sexism and the patriarchy. And that happens because parents are not all-knowing, or sometimes they're just jerks. But Santa Claus is supposed to be all-knowing and all-good, so it doesn't make any sense that that sort of mistake would still happen in this world. It also doesn't make sense, and this is a bigger problem in the Santa Claus, but I'm still going to talk about it here, that people would stop believing in Santa Claus because where the fuck do they think the presents come from?
Yeah. There are some movies that kind of like wave this away as though he makes the parents think that they bought it for him, but then he's just setting up his own thing where it's like, well, of course they're going to stop believing you because of what you're doing. So there's no clear-cut good answer for how this is supposed to work when they shove that stuff in. Yeah, there's no movie, with the notable exception of Fred Claus, that really tackles this stuff. But the best Christmas movie, Fred Claus.
You could have just stopped after Fred Claus and just said there's no movie with the exception of Fred Claus. I actually genuinely can't. And, like, the only way I think to make it work is to just be like, you know, this is a universe where Santa Claus exists and it's fundamentally different from our universe. And, like, people just don't not believe in Santa Claus. They can be mad about him. Like, the Grinch is a good example, right? Like, the Grinch is never like Santa doesn't exist. He just hates Christmas. Also,
Santa's not really a part of the Grinch, but sure, yeah. There could be like right. Grinches and Scrooges, even. I mean, there's ways. What you're saying is there's ways, and I agree with you.
Like, I know this is like a little bit like a CinemaSins bullshit thing, but like, so when I was a kid, this bugged me. Like, I remember like experiencing cognitive dissonance while watching the Santa Claus because it just didn't make sense to me, and I still feel that way now.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. But let's get back into this Santa Claus. He has other notable features, like snowflake fingers.
Yeah, so I mentioned he gets arrested, and they take his fingerprints at the police station, and when they look at his fingerprints, each one has a unique snowflake pattern embedded in it. Now, this, like, strange Santa physiology makes me wonder, in addition to things we were talking about before, do you think the people that made the Santa Claus watched this movie? Because this movie predates it. This movie's from, like, 1988.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I think that there's maybe not enough elements in the Santa Claus to really justify that as a theory, but, you know, it could be. I mean, they might have just sat down and watched a bunch of Santa Claus and created an amalgamation of a movie where they kill off Santa Claus in the beginning and someone else becomes Santa Claus.
Here's my theory. The Santa Claus movie exists because one day on cable, they showed Ernest Saves Christmas and Highlander back to back.
I mean, yeah. No, undoubtedly. And also, maybe Elf? I don't know if Elf predates the Santa Claus.
Elf does not predate the Santa Claus. But Elf has, like... Well, I don't know. Does Elf have that problem, too?
Where people don't believe in Santa Claus? Yeah, that's the whole reason why no one believes that Will Ferrell's an elf.
Well, then that bugs me, too.
Like, it's not that he's too tall. It's that, like, Santa Claus doesn't exist.
And that bugs me, too. The other way you could make it make sense, what would be maybe too cruel, would be if you established in your world that it was like, the second someone in a house doesn't believe in Santa Claus stops going to that house.
That's screwed up, because, like, what if you're, like, a older child, and, like, your youngest child's, like, 2?
Yeah, also, now that I'm thinking about it, it doesn't make any sense, because he would come to no houses.
Yeah, no, that wouldn't work at all.
Never mind. I didn't solve the problem. I just made up a meme
scenario. Moving on from that horrible scenario that no one should ever put in a movie, let's talk about how this Santa has a magic sack that he keeps losing. That is the main plot point of this movie.
Yeah, I guess it's like the source of his power?
Well, I mean, anyone can use it, but they don't know how to use it. So Ernest is able to reach into the sack, which is basically the briefcase from Pulp Fiction, but creepier. Because there's a glowing light and creepy child laughter as soon as he opens it, and it's just, he reaches his hand in, does the classic, ew, and pulls out toys that aren't what Pamela wants. And then Pamela is also able to do it, and she pulls out stuff that isn't what she wants.
But you're oversimplifying. Because they don't pull out toys, they pull out glowing orbs that then morph into toys. And so the implication, I think, is that either having the Santa Claus power... I guess having the Santa Claus powers allows you to form these orbs of raw toy possibility into the correct toys. But if you don't have the Santa power, then they just, like, turn into a random toy? Like, there's some kind of, like, metaphysical, like, Akashic records of toys that these magic balls are drawing off of? Or maybe they're pulling a random toy out of the person's memory. I
do not know, but all of the toys that Ernest pulled out for Pamela did not seem to win her over. And she had no reaction to them as if they were something from her
It's also weird that the first quote-unquote toy that he makes is like a lawn ornament of a flamingo.
Because that's what Ernest would want,
but that's not supposed to give you what you want. Very confusing. Other thing about this, and I know I keep harping on the Santa rules, because for some reason this is a real pet peeve of mine. I didn't realize until we started recording this podcast. But
welcome to the importance of being Santa.
We could do...
I'm your host.
We could do that. That could be a season. I don't know if I want to do that. I'm not...
I don't
I'm just saying it's possible. So there's a part... So Ernest loses his job as a taxi cab driver because he gives Santa a free ride, which is apparently a regular problem for him. Like, they're still trying to make Ernest like a good soul. And so...
Sure, it's not that he loses his job as a taxi cab driver for being the world's most awful taxi cab driver.
Yeah, he should have lost it for being a terrible and incredibly dangerous taxi driver. But instead he loses it because he gives Santa Claus a free ride. But the reason he has to give Santa Claus a free ride is because when Santa goes to pay, he just has a bunch of toy money.
Yeah, it's essentially Monopoly money, but they call it fun time
With
dollars.
an unestablished and never referenced again character named, like, Freddy Funtime on it. They do, like, a close-up of the money, and there's, like, a guy's face, and he's, like, pulling, like, an exaggerated Jim Carrey face. So this predates the popularity of Jim Carrey. Look out for our inevitable Jim Carrey season in the future, too.
So I have a theory. Do you think Jim Carrey just, was flipping through the tube and saw Ernest and saw that one little pixel of Freddy Funtime?
Yeah, he based his entire persona off of it? I think that's plausible. Okay, but the point I'm getting at is Santa Claus is like, oh no, I did have a bunch of currency before, but I delivered a toy kitchen or cash register or something.
No, it was like a Monopoly, like a fun time game.
He gave some gift to a kid, and he included a bunch of play money but he must have accidentally given him the real money. But if the way Santa Claus's thing works is that he just pulls a magic ball out and it automatically forms into the toy, why is he physically putting fake money into it? Why wouldn't it just already have the fake money?
Well, all the toys that we saw were like one-part toys, maybe? And like a Monopoly game, it's like you have to pull out the board, then you gotta pull out each house, and then you gotta pull out the money.
So it's like simple toys he doesn't need to make ahead of time, but more complicated stuff he does need to make ahead of time.
Which explains why he has elves.
He does have elves. We meet 2 of them. They don't do much.
And they seem frightened of Santa Claus. They seem scared of him. They're big kiss asses.
Which is also well, not the kick ass thing, but kiss ass.
Kiss ass. They also do a kick ass subplot.
Yeah. They team up with Big Daddy and Hit Girl. No. So, that's also a weird thing in the Santa Claus, where some of the elves are, like, afraid of him. Implying that, like, the previous Santa was, like, not a good boss, and possibly a very bad person. And with this one, we get the impression that this Santa Claus is, like, not a good boss.
I mean, he seems bumbly, but he doesn't seem like purposely.
Yeah, but like you said, they're afraid of him, though. They're afraid of telling him that Ernest drove the sleigh, and then he's like, I think it's a crackerjack idea for Ernest to fly the sleigh. They're like, yeah, boss. They don't sound like that. They have, like, squeaky voices, but they're like, oh, yeah, we thought it was great.
Yeah, after they've been, like, the entire time using the hands across their neck motion, because they've just been with Ernest, and he took him in the stratosphere. Yeah. There's other small things about Santa. One point he says he respects other cultures, which is great, and just means he only goes to the houses that believe in him, I guess.
I guess.
He isn't the best judge of character, or like he's like trying to be, like, as you mentioned, lawful good. But during the movie, he does say that he had a little bit of doubt that Pamela would do the right thing after she did the right thing. He
says it to her. I thought that was upsetting.
Like, she had the revelation, she's doing the right thing, and that's when you say that to her? Messed up.
He should have had faith in her. I think it's very upsetting that Santa Claus did not believe in her completely. Like, I love Superman. And I think, like, that, like, for part of what's appealing about like, what are otherwise simplistic characters, like a Santa Claus or like a Superman, is that they have, like, an unwavering faith in humanity. Like, my favorite, I said, like, oh, I don't think this Santa Claus is my favorite fictional version of Santa Claus. I think my favorite fictional version of Santa Claus is the one from the Klaus comic by Grant Morrison and Dan Mora, whose, like, most shining moment is when he's, like, he yells that there are no bad kids. Like, that shit's good. I don't like this, like, weird, judgy, morally dubious Santa Claus.
Yeah, I don't know. He also is able to convince other people he's Santa pretty easily, because he goes to prison, and all of a sudden all the prisoners, even one in a glorious crop top that is reminiscent of the shirts that the kids wore at Ernest Goes to Camp, love him and claim that he's Santa Claus and do a great Christmas song chorus with him.
Yeah, so when Ernest and Pamela go to break him out, they're in disguise, so he doesn't recognize them as his friends from earlier in the movie. And Ernest is trying to get him released by being like, this guy's crazy. He's not actually Santa Claus. Let me take him to, like, a mental hospital. And the prisoners defend him. And that is one of the parts that does make him a little bit more likable. It's like when they cut back to him in the prison after they put him in there, he's, like, leading all of the prisoners on his cell block in song. And I was like, that's kind of sweet. Like, but he...
Yeah, that's better. But the contrast, he did watch Ernest until he was 11.
That's one of the weird... There's a lot of weird biographical details about Ernest in this movie, and that's one of them that's totally baffling to me, is he says that he watched Ernest until he was 11. What happened when Ernest was 11 that made him fall off of Santa's radar?
I guess Ernest was a bad kid until he was 11?
Would keep watching him if he was bad. Something else happened. He just lost track of Ernest somehow, even though he's supposed to have track of everyone. Like, he does that trick through, like, a lot of the movie, where he tells people things about themselves that he shouldn't know. The thing that makes makes him losing track of Ernest when he's 11 all the more confusing is in the very beginning of the movie. Santa Claus is arriving on a plane, and he's sitting next to a businessman, and they're having a conversation, and it's like that sort of bit where Santa Claus is talking about being Santa, but the businessman is just interpreting every thing he says as being like a euphemism for him talking about business. A business euphemism.
Yeah, I mean, there's a real great joke in that where Santa Claus is talking about how it's hard to keep track of who's good and who's bad, and the guy's like, sounds like a database issue.
And that guy says, man, all I want for Christmas is some snow. Like, he's lamenting being in Florida. And Santa's like, oh, I thought you wanted a watch or something. He says like, oh, like he knew what this dude's previous Christmas wish was. And this is like a middle-aged man. And Santa's still keeping track of what this dude wants for Christmas. So what happened when Ernest was 11?
I don't know, but eventually in the movie, he does make it snow in Florida, completely ruining Florida's ecosystem.
Yeah, but that's the thing. And he also remembers that guy's new Christmas wish all the way through the movie, just so he can have it be a payoff at the end. And it's like, but something about Ernest. Do you want to talk about the other biographical details they drop about Ernest in this?
1 second. There is one last Santa Claus detail I want to note, which is interesting, is that there is seemingly no Mrs. Claus, or he eventually cheats on her, because at the end of this movie he does hook up with a hospital secretary.
They have like a weird simmering romance throughout the movie where like every time they talk about him, she's like, oh, that nice man. And like shit like that. And then there's a part where they're talking and it cuts to them and she goes, did you ever find your sack? I don't know why I'm giving her the same voice as Santa Claus, but that was really funny. Yeah, so the options here are, there's no Mrs. Claus. He's been too busy being Santa for 200 years. No, that wouldn't be 200 years, because this was in 1988. Or, there was a Mrs. Claus in the 19th century, and she just had a normal human lifespan and died.
Or, Santa's a playboy.
It depends on how... It depends on how sad you think he is, or how much of a dick you think he is.
That is for sure. Alright, so let's get into Ernest. You know, that's what we're here for. We kind of talked way too much about Santa. We apologize. So, we start off with Ernest. He is a taxi driver. He drives horribly. And also, he is taxi number 69.
We get a prominent shot, which I honestly can't parse if it's intentional or not. Where we see his taxi number, and it is, in fact, the funny number 609. No, it's 69. It's really 69.
Yeah, I know. It's weird. It's a weird choice.
I have a theory, and I don't know if I want to get into it now or not.
I think I know what you're going to talk about, and let's kind of save that for once we describe the rest of Ernest's characteristics in this movie, because there's a lot, and there's specific things in it that probably back up your theory.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things is he is less careful, seems to be a lot hastier, and pushier to taxi customers. In the beginning of the movie, he starts off by having some guy in the back of his taxi that he's trying to get to the airport, singing "Oh Christmas Tree, Oh Christmas Tree, Oh Christmas Tree, Oh Christmas Tree," which is great. Good joke. And he is more concerned about getting that guy just to the location rather than getting him there intact and obeying the rules of the road. And by the time that guy leaves the cab, he's catatonic and can't move. And all Ernest is concerned about is just making sure he has maybe 40% of the luggage that he had with him at the time and his jacket, and then leaving before he could get caught.
Yeah, two things about this guy. One, he's not played by Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, but he looks a lot like Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And two, yeah, he's like frozen stiff with shock from Ernest's reckless driving. And so the end of Ernest driving him to the airport is Ernest just shoves him through the baggage carousel and like starts throwing luggage in after him, and that's pretty funny.
Yeah, but it's also like, this is not the same Ernest that he went to camp with. Like, this Ernest is less caring about people and just trying to do what needs to be done and bounce, which is...
That's what I'm saying. It's the chaos is directed outward. In Ernest Goes to Camp, Ernest is the one who's constantly getting hurt. In this one, Ernest is pretty much unscathed throughout the movie, but he hurts a lot of other people through his hijinks. Then there are a couple moments where he's on the receiving end of the pain stick. But a lot of the times it's other people, which, makes him a lot less endearing, I think.
For sure, especially noticeable at the beginning of the movie where he just starts destroying traffic and holding everybody up. It's like he's no longer a force of chaos just to like himself. He's like chaos around the world, and it's not great.
Yeah, it's also like when he finally gets fired, you're left to wonder like, why didn't he get fired way earlier? Like, Ernest Goes to Camp, he's ridiculously incompetent, but you sort of buy that he would keep this job because he's so nice and so earnest about trying to do a good job of this, and presumably he's working for a lot less than he actually should be getting paid.
Well, he lives there too, so he might just be working to live there.
Yeah.
He's the groundskeeper.
Yeah. But in this one, you're like, why isn't he in jail?
Absolutely. And this Ernest is...
And he will be eventually in the next movie, but that's for the next episode.
That's true. Maybe it's related. Who knows? But in this movie, he's also different in the way he talks. He has, for some reason, decided to do a lot of John Wayne impressions as a start.
Yeah. And he's doing a lot of John Wayne impressions, and he's doing more of that thing where he tries to sound smart. Which is I think is still a funny bit, but there's way more of it in this movie.
He's way more wisecracking. When Santa is unable to pay him, he says, "What we have here is a failure to accumulate."
But the weird thing about that is he says that in a John Wayne impression, but that's not a John Wayne line.
No, he actually does this thing during the movie that he didn't do at Ernest Goes to Camp, which is like every other line where he's like trying to like put that enunciation on it is like spoken as like a movie trailer voice.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's just generally like this movie's more talky, I think. At least he is.
And he makes less... I mean, he didn't make that much sense in the other movies, but he makes less sense in this movie. Like, if you were just like hanging out with him, you'd be like, what the heck is this guy talking about?
Yeah, he's just like generally, I think, less of like an actual character in this movie than he is in the previous one. It's weird.
Definitely feels like it suffers from the effect of Flanderization.
But it's hyper sped up because it's only the second movie. Like, this would make sense if it was like 4 movies later. And we know that, like, spoiler alert, I guess, but we know he's more human in the later movies. Like, this is a weird outlier, I think.
I mean, on top of that, maybe they're going back towards Hey Vern sort of stuff, where like they take in like the Ernest from Hey Vern, which might make sense because there is a huge tie-in to Hey Vern in this movie. Vern's there.
Yes. So when Wentz separated from Santa Claus.
After he gets fired and Pamela is still hanging out with him for some reason because she kind of just adopts him, I guess.
Yeah, again, that doesn't make a ton of sense. Like, Ernest Goes to Camp, I understand why the kids are around because it's his job to watch over them. I don't know why she sticks around with Ernest at all in this movie. I guess just because he won't get rid of her.
Well, here's the thing. I think it's more or less he just doesn't question her. So, like, she just gets over the initial creepy impression that she walks into, where he just greets her with a John Wayne impression. The creepy guy in the back says, "I'm Santa Claus."
Yeah.
And they go. But she really, like, every time like something's going on, like she's a runaway, she's trying to find shelter and food, and she's like, "Oh, this Ernest guy, he's not too bright. I'll hang out with him, and maybe I'll get some free meals and a place to sleep for the night because I'm a runaway." But Ernest himself, he like never questions why she's hanging around with him.
Yeah. So like I was saying, Wentz separated from Santa Claus, they go to Vern's house to
Hey, Vern.
ostensibly help Vern set up for a Christmas party. And then Ernest destroys Vern's house in a completely nonsensical manner. It's like, again, another example of the chaos being directed completely outward. Ernest suffers no consequences for this action of destroying Vern's house. There's like he's trying to set up a Christmas tree. It's too big. He's pushing it into the corner. He gives up, and it's just sort of like wedged there, fucking up his ceiling. And then at some point he's trying to like unplug lights, and he just keeps pulling. You and I were watching this the whole time, and we're like, what is he actually trying to do? Because he's just yanking on this cord, and he rips all the wires out of Vern's house, and just keeps going. And then he stops and takes a break, and he drinks punch directly out of a punch bowl, which I thought was very funny. And then they leave.
Yeah. They fuck up Vern's house, and then just leave and bounce, and the whole time Ernest is just talking nonsense. At one point, he said he taught Vern all he knew about nuclear physics, which is interesting. And also, we find out from Santa himself that Vern was Ernest's best friend since they were kids.
Yeah. So, one, is Vern a nuclear physicist?
Maybe.
Well, does that work?
Ernest taught him everything he knows.
Does that work geographically with, like... No, wait, that doesn't make sense. I was about to bring up NASA, but that's astrophysics. But yeah, so Vern may or may not be a nuclear physicist. Also, he's Ernest's childhood friend. Is Ernest from Florida?
I don't know. That's
or did
just
he
where they
follow Vern to another state?
Maybe. I don't... Do you know where Hey Vern was set, if anywhere?
I don't know. I've never seen any of it.
I'm just going to quickly look it up. But while I'm quickly looking it up, talk more about Ernest.
Okay, well, so... I think is the time to talk about perhaps where this film fits chronologically with the other Ernest films.
Hey Vern was located... Well, the filming locations were Tennessee and California, but there's no specific location for the show itself.
Okay. I know a lot of this Ernest stuff is filmed in Tennessee. I think like a fair amount of the movies are filmed there, too. So I think we got a couple options. We have two options that I see. One is more mundane, which is that this is just set before Ernest goes to camp. That Ernest is in fact from Florida. And that after the events of this movie, he leaves his hometown and becomes a camp counselor. Which means in Ernest Goes to Camp, he knows the Santa Claus exists, and he's seen magic, which is weird. The other option, and this is a more daring theory that I've constructed here, is that there's a split timeline. Now, any listeners that are familiar with the Zelda timeline are going to have an easier time understanding what I'm about to say. Because...
Are they, though?
Probably not. A few years ago, Nintendo released a book to tie into Zelda called The Hyrule Historia. And that contained, for the first time ever, an official timeline of all the Zelda games that have been released up to that point. I think the only one that's come out since then is Breath of the Wild. And maybe also, I think also that sequel to Link to the Past. This is not important. But the weird thing about that timeline is that it splits into 3. And so, 2 of those make sense. You've got 2, because they all branch off of Ocarina of Time. One of them is the timeline where Link just stays an adult after the end of the events of Ocarina of Time. One of them, he goes back to being a kid with all of his foreknowledge from his adventures 7 years in the future. That's the timeline where Majora's Mask happens. Okay, that makes perfect sense that it would split into those 2. I mean, it's still a little weird because it's like, you know, that other timeline had not been acknowledged before, but whatever. But weirdly, extra weirdly, there is a third split timeline that's just Link fails. It's just a timeline where you lose the game and the bad guy wins. That they created for some reason. And even weirder is that timeline contains like the original Zelda game. So there's this dark failure timeline that exists that has a bunch of the games in it. And I propose a theory that this movie takes place in a dark timeline where Ernest failed in the events of Ernest Goes to Camp. I think it explains why he seems to be kind of a worse person, why he's worse with people, and in particular, there's a sequence where he's mean to a kid.
Mean to a group of kids?
Yeah. Perhaps because they remind him of the group of kids he used to watch over.
So for context, that scene is there's a group of kids at the hospital that he's visiting, and he's looking for Santa, and the group of kids end up laughing at him for some earnest antic, and he does a sneer laugh at them back.
He does a mean face. He mean mugs these children, and I think that the only logical explanation is because he's still wounded in his soul over the loss of Camp Kikiki.
Maybe. There is another thing in this movie that kind of backs us up. Although he knows as well in Camp Kikiki, Ernest Goes to Camp, that he's a screw-up, he does say that later on in this movie that he is known to be a screw-up. He knows himself that he's a screw-up.
Yeah.
But another weird thing about that is that in this movie, like in Ernest Goes to Camp, at least he was listening to others. Like he may just like do what he wanted to do, but he still like had conversations with people. In this movie, it feels like he doesn't actually listen to anyone. He just does things. There's a great example when he's driving the sleigh and he's about to press the turbo button, I guess, and the elves are like, "Don't press that button, don't press that button," and then he just like does it anyway.
Yeah. What has he got to
and there's
lose,
like plenty of examples too when he's like a taxi cab driver and he's like not listening to the person in the back and just like going his haphazard way, doing whatever he thinks is right. I guess he's like extremely overconfident for seemingly no reason.
Yeah, this is an Ernest who's hardened his heart. This is an Ernest that's fallen to darkness.
If that's the case, he would definitely fail the ritual of the blade, the stone, and the arrow, and if someone shot at him, he would die. He's killable now.
Yeah. Now, we'll see. I do have a theory. I think that the other films will bear out that they are set in the Ernest is victorious and immortal timeline.
Maybe. Let's just knock off a couple things and then get into the rest of this movie. There's two other characters that we kind of have to discuss before we can get to the essentials. First and foremost, let's talk about like just two more things I wanted to bring up with Ernest. The big thing for him in this movie is he is somehow now a master of disguise. He has 3 different disguises in this movie, and they're not bad, actually. They kind of work.
You could be fooled by these disguises.
At one point, he disguised as the assistant inspection officer with Harmony, who pretends to be the mayor's daughter, who's a dumb schoolgirl, and they try to get Santa out of jail. And at one point, he pretends to be the grandma of Joe Carruthers to figure out where he is. And at one point, he pretends to be a snake handler who lost a son, and then also is bringing snakes to a movie set.
Yeah, a Cajun snake handler who accidentally killed his own son with a snake.
Yeah, and also it's worth noting that the grandmother also lost a son.
And why, pray tell, do you think Ernest would be so fixated on stories of loss?
It's equally likely that there's an in-between story where Ernest had a son and he dies. I want it to be known that at some point in like post Jim Varney world, they thought about bringing the Ernest franchise back with a son of Ernest.
They also were going to do did do briefly, like a CGI Ernest cartoon guy.
Oh God,
it looks bad. I've seen a picture of it. It's like it looks like worse than like the Dudes in the Money for Nothing video.
That does look really bad. Just a side note. As Ernest was a kid, he relates to hearing something in the vents and was wondering if Santa Claus himself was real and just oozing as a blob through the vents to get to Ernest.
Yeah, it's not even like a dream. It's just like a thing he imagined that he tells Pamela about in great detail at one point. It's this really weird part of the movie.
For sure.
I dug that though because like I did a lot of that sort of vivid imagining of horrific scenarios when I was a kid.
Yeah, you would.
Yeah, I mean, I just spent a whole bunch of time talking about a Ernest failure timeline. I think people understand what kind of person I am and was.
Alright, now let's talk about Pamela real quick. I mean, we kind of covered the basis of her as a character, but there's one thing in particular that is confusing to me as in this movie. So just a little bit of background, her name that she adopts as Harmony Star, and she's a runaway because there was some domestic dispute at home that I don't think they really go into. But the biggest thing in this movie is that her arc is that they discover the sack, and then she doesn't believe in Christmas, and then she runs away with the sack to try and use it for money.
Yeah, but she still can't get it to work.
Right. And then she almost leaves with it on a train going anywhere. Not at midnight, though, just going anywhere, normal time.
I think it's 6:50 specifically is the time they're given.
And then she encounters other kids who, like an older brother to a younger girl that are separate in the train station, and the older brother is trying to tell the younger girl that Santa Claus doesn't exist, and she gets upset. And that's her arc, is she has the revelation that people should hold on to the wonder of childhood, I guess.
I guess?
It doesn't make too much sense.
I mean, she has this moment where she's, like, gonna get on the train, and the brother says to the sister, like, Santa Claus doesn't exist. And she's like, why would you say that to him? And she tells the kid off, but it's like, yeah, it's really unclear what revelation she's having or why this is important, but it does lead her to bring the sack back.
Yes, but it's also noteworthy that she does a switch early in the film where she does take the sack and then gives Santa a fake sack, which looks exactly like the other sack, but is full of feathers. And it's like, how did she get that dummy sack? And my theory is that she somehow made the other, like, real Christmas sack work and pulled out a fake sack out of the real Christmas sack.
Maybe she was just pulling random stuff out of the sack, and one of them happened to be an identical sack, and that's what gave her the idea to steal it.
Ooh, maybe. Probably less likely.
Yeah, probably less likely. How do you feel about Pamela as a character?
It's not great. So
there's not a lot to her.
There's not a lot to her.
Kid.
She's thin, like written. Well, she is, I guess, thin as a person, but that's not my problem with her. I have no problem with thin people. Thin people, do your thing. It's fine. Look.
I think that thin people got no reason to live.
Whoa, hold on. Okay, no.
That's going to get us canceled.
Don't get us canceled. We're already in episode 2. Come on.
We're also going to get a copyright strike because of my amazing Randy Newman impression.
This is why I can't work on the Wimpy Kid movies anymore. Anyway.
You couldn't do the Wimpy Kid movies now? In this climate. This is the social justice warriors. The social justice Wimpy Kids.
But, I mean, she's just like a side character that doesn't really have
social
much to her. It doesn't really have much to her. And I guess it's fine. Like, it's nice to have Ernest interact with a kid again, because that's like, classic foil to Ernest, because he is a kid. But I don't think she's very well written. And there's plenty of times where, like, it just kind of felt uncomfortable. Especially because, like, she latched on to this, at time, creepy dude that she knows nothing about. And then when she's doing the prison, like she's working with Ernest to get Santa out of prison, her dummy schoolgirl thing is just weird.
It's very, yeah. It's also, she's like Santa. I feel like it's a character that I wish they just, like, went further with. Like, she's supposed to be, like, I called her generic spunky kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, like, they don't lean enough into that. Like, I feel like this character could have been really fun if she was, like, a little bit more over the top and was, like, like Jubilee from the X-Men or something like that. Like, that kind of, like, Valley Girl kid with, like, all the weird slang and, like, shit like that. Like, doing pranks and stuff. But she doesn't really do anything.
Yeah, no. And that's really it for her. I don't have much for Joe Carruthers. But it is noteworthy that he just can't curse. It's a thing.
Yeah, that's one of the things that starts to make the conflict between him and the movie producers. Is he supposed to be like, Merry Christmas, you son of a bitch, to the monster in the film that he's filming, and then shoot him with a gun. Also, the monster is a guy in a Creature from the Black Lagoon costume with, like, a bunch of wires hanging off of him.
Yeah, it's like if you took Creature from the Black Lagoon and say, how do we make this more 90s? And boom.
Yeah, let's hang a broken printer around his neck.
Yeah. And then his biggest accomplishment is apparently getting kids to say please and thank you. And also his last words ever that he gave to witnesses was, it's him, I'm him, Merry Christmas, and then he's never seen again.
He's having a meeting with the producers, and he sees Ernest on the Santa sleigh out the window. And he says that and runs away, and he's, yeah, like you said, gone forever. Like, it's, what do they think? Like, what a wild story to be like, oh, but, like, can you imagine watching the news and being like, beloved children's show host Joe Carruthers disappeared after a bizarre confrontation with movie producers.
Yeah, like those movie producers are screwed.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like kind of like Big, like the movie Big with
Oh, it's
Tom
totally like
Hanks.
Big.
But Big, I think Big is worse because it implies that his coworker and love interest may have kidnapped children, and she's totally going to jail.
Big's got a lot of weird implications.
Yeah, we'll get to it in our Tom Hanks season.
Yeah.
But
Thanks for the memories.
Oh, that's really good.
So long and Hanks for all the fish.
Okay, enough. So it's weird. It's a weird thing for Joe, but he's also not much of a character in this movie either. So
him and his whole deal, where he's like a TV show host, and then he's going to do a movie, and Harmony's whole thing, where she's like, "I'm going to be a star," makes it feel like this movie was supposed to be set in LA, and then for some reason they just decided it was in Florida. They go to I mean, I guess there's, like, Universal Studios or whatever is in Florida. But, like, it seems like this movie was supposed to be set in LA.
For sure.
I kept forgetting that it wasn't, to be honest.
Yeah, there was actually a scene when they were doing the movie thing and working out final deals where they have a picture in the background of, like, Florida, like the name, like, on a hill, like, kind of like Hollywood. And it's like, why didn't they just set this in Hollywood? Why did it have to be Florida?
Yeah, I have no idea.
Alright, well, we gotta get to these final characters and then move on to essentials. So let's talk about the last couple of characters in this movie that are somehow important. The dudes that run the luggage claim.
Yeah, so for people who listen to the previous episodes, who I assume is everyone listening to this and also everyone on the planet, you will remember the chefs, of course. Beloved characters, the chef and the other chef. And there's a similar figures in this film. In fact, one of them is played by the same dude. I believe his name is Gaylord Sartain.
Mm-hmm.
He was the bigger, the heavyset chef. He's back. He's playing one of the dudes in the, like, customs holding facility that are watching the reindeer throughout the movie. But his sidekick, despite being another skinny guy, is played by a totally different dude named, like, Bill Berge. And then, even weirder, at one point, 2 animal control officers show up, and one of them is the guy that played the other chef in Ernest Goes to Camp.
Camp? Camp? That's the perfect ingredient for eggs erroneous.
Yeah, so, like, these guys are way worse than the chef. No, I mean, not way worse. Again, that's maybe giving the chefs too much credit. But they are worse than the chefs.
They are more removed from the movie. So, there is only one small interaction with Ernest in this movie, when he, like, goes to pick up the reindeer, which apparently were shipped separately. Also, like, earlier. Weird. Anyway, he goes to pick up the reindeer, and they have that, like, a slight interaction, and that's really it. The entire movie, like, we cut back to these guys dealing with this situation. And they're, like, Gaylord Sartain's character is doing, like, the eye movements, rolling his eyes back and forth really quickly while looking at the camera, and doing that weird pig squeal scream. But that's really it. Like, it just, like, every once in a while we check in on these guys dealing with the same thing. And it feels like there should have been more to this. Like, it feels like they really squeezed this joke, if it even is, like, a whole joke, into, like, this whole freaking movie.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's a much less clear, like, Eggs Erroneous was like a bit. Like, they were doing the Eggs Erroneous bit whenever they cut to them. And then that bit played into the finale when they used the food ingoopinator to attack the campsite. But there's no clear bit to this. It's just like, oh, isn't it wacky that these guys are looking at magic reindeer, I guess?
Yeah, at one point the reindeer end up on the ceiling, and they have an umbrella, which is alright as a joke. And then they call the animal control officers, who look up at the ceiling and then bounce. And then they call them Latvian goats or aliens. And they have a conversation because they can't quite decide on how things are written between the two of them on whether they're waiting for helper Eames or helper elves.
Yeah. That's like, there's a little bit of them, a bit being like, they can't read, I guess. Because at the very end of the movie, in kind of like a postscript scene, they're arguing about whether or not something says Easter or Fester.
No,
and then a pair of...
they're arguing whether it's E-Bunny or S-Bunny.
Yeah, well, but then then two ears crash over the top, and it's like, uh-oh, Easter Bunny, I guess. He mailed himself?
Which is not related to the plot at all, which is super
No.
weird. But I actually have a theory about this, which has no consequences and is super dumb.
It's my favorite kind of theory.
The theory is that the guy who said it was S Bunny is correct, and Santa has a bunny sidekick that just got there late, and has nothing to do with the Easter Bunny.
Yeah, Santa's giant, upsettingly strong bunny.
It's Santa Bunny. Y'all forget about Santa Bunny.
Can you imagine how mad the Easter Bunny must be about the existence of Santa Bunny? You don't... I'm the bunny already. Why do you need one? You already have so many things.
That we get a bunny too.
I just thought it'd be cool to have a bunny, you know? I wasn't even thinking about you when I got this. Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, okay.
So that is it for the basis of this movie and all its characters within. We can get into essential elements, or we can talk about high and low points.
Let's do essential elements, and then we'll do high and low points.
Okay, so let's list the essential elements that we got from Ernest Goes to Camp.
Let me pull up the list real fast. I don't know why I'm stalling. I'm just going to cut out the extra time.
This part will be cut out of the podcast. Bloopers.
Don't do a funny thing. That's going to make me like Okay, so here are our essential elements of Ernest. He should wear a hat and vest.
Check.
He should be low status with ambition, and there should be an element of class struggle.
Check on the low status. No check on the ambition or class struggle.
Yeah, which I think is part of the problem with this movie. We have him as a, quote, crafts, unquote, man. He doesn't really make anything in this movie.
No check.
Folksy, quote, wisdom, that's there.
Yeah, that's kind of, like, overamped, but it's there.
He has various catchphrases. We've shouted out here specifically, know what I mean? But then also the thing that he kept doing in Ernest Goes to Camp, which is distracting people by asking them if they saw a rabbit, which despite the presence of the Easter Bunny at the end, or the Santa Bunny at the end of the movie, is not in this.
No, but there is another thing that he does, maybe more so in this movie than he did in Ernest Goes to Camp, if at all, where he has just his, like, a laugh. It's like, whenever, like, he gets away with something or something happens, and at some point, Santa himself copies that laugh.
Yeah, that does happen.
So I don't know if we want to add that to the catchphrases, but that is a thing.
I will add Ernest's signature snicker to the catchphrases. Slapstick comedy, that's there, obviously. There's a ton of that in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even more so than Ernest Goes to Camp.
For sure. I think that's to its detriment, but still.
So, fourth wall breaking, but sans self-awareness. Not really in this movie that I can think of. He doesn't really...
So, I don't know
if we want to count the Vern thing.
That's what I was going to say. I don't know if we want to count him just talking to Vern, us, but maybe not. Maybe that's just like, there is a in-universe explanation for what he's doing, so I guess it's really not fourth wall breaking.
Yeah. We have him being camera-esque, friend to all children and a child at heart. No, not in this movie.
Well...
He's kind of still a child at heart.
Yes.
But kind of a shitty one.
He's still a child at heart. He's definitely not a friend to all children. He is a friend to some children, I guess. He's a friend
to children.
A single children.
Complicated relationship with animals and machines. He is attacked by snakes.
Yes, there's a part in this movie, which is, I think, I'm going to bring it up later, is probably one of my biggest, highest bits, where he's like able to pull snakes out of a truck, but also get his face covered in snakes when he's bitten with them. And then he does have a complicated relationship with machines, I guess, because he can't control cars or sleighs very well.
Mm-hmm. There's a really funny part where he's flying the sleigh where it cuts to him, and he's holding something he clearly tore out of the sleigh's console, and he's just screaming, "What is this?"
And then at some point he needs oxygen masks on the sleigh.
Incompetent and inept, absolutely. Cartoon violence, definitely.
No.
Overly and... Well, less so than in...
I mean, in terms of cartoon violence, what I imagine is in Ernest Goes to Camp, where he gets the tray shoved in his face and there's an outline of Ernest's face. But in this movie, I don't really think of a concrete example of just, cartoon violence. You know what I mean?
The closest thing I can think of is when the taxi passenger is like frozen stiff with shock. Like, that's pretty cartoony.
Yeah, but it's not Ernest.
Because Ernest is like, no, but it's not Ernest. Yeah, overly and quickly confident.
100% true.
Yeah, sure. Can't eat. We do not see him eat.
So at one point he makes pancakes, but they are all for Harmony. He flips them in the air and somehow they magically land on a plate. He does sip some punch. And at one point he says he's all about pork. That's his red meat of choice. But we don't see him eat.
Yeah, Harmony says that she doesn't believe that she believes that eating red meat makes people mean. And he says that pork is his meat of choice. Which, okay.
Sure.
Easily bamboozled / distracted, especially by fire. No real fire in this, but he does get distracted.
I wouldn't say
he doesn't really get bamboozled, though.
There's like no situation in this movie where he's bamboozled.
There's not really a villain in this movie.
Well, there is the agent of Joe Carruthers who does get Santa, or as he says, Mr. Santos, locked up in jail.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not a villain to Ernest. He's just a villain to Santa.
Yeah. Supernatural element. I mean, there's Santa and there's magic. Mm-hmm. The weight of prophecy is not in this.
Well, not if we're talking about Ernest.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess there's the Santa, like, legacy thing. But no, Ernest is not involved in any prophecy. Chaos, definitely. Even more so than I think than the previous movie. And now, I think this is one of the ones that gets to the core of why this movie is weaker than Ernest Goes to Camp. Ernest must suffer physically and emotionally, but ultimately triumph.
Now, he does suffer physically and emotionally, but does he triumph?
Not really, because he doesn't really have a goal. And also, while he does suffer physically, not as much as in the other one, and while he does suffer emotionally, it's nowhere near to the length that he suffers in Ernest Goes to Camp. There's no awfully glad it's raining.
No.
This. And if they tried to, it wouldn't work.
But something I'll get to maybe a little bit later is there are points of sadness in this movie. And I don't know if, like, Ernest movies just must have a general sadness to them to be an Ernest movie. But Ernest himself in this movie doesn't really have that arc. He knows at one point that he's a screw-up, but that just is quickly changed by him figuring something else out.
And then self-sacrifice, which, no, not really. Ernest is not a sacrifice for the greater good in this movie.
No, he has an idea of what's right and what's wrong and immediately knows to do what's right, but he doesn't really have any element of self-sacrifice. And there's also one other thing, I don't know if you kept this on, but I remember an essential of being that Ernest is a veteran.
Oh, I did. I totally skipped that. I'm sorry. That is on the list. I just skipped it. Because we were talking so much about the pancakes. Yeah, that doesn't come up.
No, it does not.
But it's possible. I mean, we've talked that I feel like this is a wounded Ernest emotionally. Like, Ernest could be the way he is in this movie because of trauma building up. Not just from the real war, but also from his failed guerrilla war against the Crater Mining Company.
Maybe. Do we want to add or take anything off this list based on this movie?
I don't think so. I don't think this movie added anything that I would say is essential for Ernest. And I think the stuff that was absent from it, that Ernest Goes to Camp had, its absence here just serves to highlight the importance of those elements.
Maybe. There is two things I would argue for. First and foremost, I think we already included this, the laugh, the Ernest snicker. And secondly, I think one of the biggest things that worked in this movie that we might just be able to tweak into something that is better representative of Ernest as a whole is the Master of Disguise thing. I mean, I kind of like that.
Yeah. And
he seemed really good at it. And I don't know, it felt like something that could contribute to the soul of Ernest.
Yeah, I'm willing to add that. Yeah, Master of Disguise. He is like unto Disguisio, or Pistachio Disguisio.
He's not the Master of Disguise, though. This may even support your theory, but he does end up going into the atmosphere with the sleigh at one point, and being stuck up there, and then also going round and round and round the Earth. Mm-hmm. And surprisingly, does not burn up in re-entry.
Nor does he turn back time like Superman, despite the shot of him going around the Earth looking almost exactly like that shot from the Superman movie.
Okay. Is there anything else that we want to add or take off of the essentials, or I think we're secure in the essentials?
I think we're good.
Okay. Let us get to the high and low points.
Yeah, I think for me, my favorite point in the movie is when he drinks out of that punch bowl. I think that's a really funny image, and I like it a lot. I'm enamored of
That's
it.
a good one. One of my high points, I have a couple, is the snakes situation, where Ernest is just having a casual conversation with Santa Claus as he's trying to get snakes out of his van. And he just looks up and continues the conversation with his snakes just attached to his face. And then
Yeah, it's a bunch of rubber
it
snakes.
takes him 2 minutes to realize, but it still happens, which is great.
Yeah, that's a good one. I also like the part where he's making the pancakes and he's just flipping them into the air really casually. It's one of the more absurd scenes in the movie because you're like, why is he doing that? Why is he making pancakes like that? They're just going up into the air and not coming back down, but he keeps flipping them up there.
It takes a whole 5 minutes of him flipping the pancakes up sporadically to actually coalesce into pancakes falling onto Pamela's plate. So for a while, you're like, what is he doing? It's not like a quick trick. It's like a overtime thing. I had another high bit where there's a customs worker who is just fed up with everything. And when people come up to him and say they're Santa Claus or they're elves, he just goes along with it. And I thought that was kind of great.
Yeah, that's a good one. I liked, as I said before, the part where Ernest tells a story about imagining Santa Claus turning into goo and flowing through the vents.
Oh yeah, that's good. There's a point where they can't figure out the sleigh, and they're about to be terminated by air traffic control, and Ernest actually pays the toll. He goes through a toll station and pays the toll as he's passing a highway.
Yeah. He just shoots right through there. I like the part where he screams, "What is this?" And I just kind of went through a lot of my high points, but thought that caught me off guard. I thought that was really funny.
I also like the Santa sadly talking about how he never fought in a sack. The hospital secretary. I don't know if she ever had an actual title.
I think she's the TV studio secretary or receptionist or something.
She asked, "Did you ever find your sack?" And he's like, "Yeah, but it was taken again." And I also like that Santa Claus was referred to as Mr. Santos throughout this movie. I thought that was just a funny bit.
Mm-hmm. There's one part in particular where somebody asks the agent about him, and he's like, his real name is Mr. Santos.
He just knows that. There's no evidence for it. Let's get into low points.
Yeah, I think the low point for me is when Ernest is mean to that kid.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. I think one of the biggest low points for me in this movie is the pacing. So there's specifically stands out when they're doing a scene transition between Santa getting arrested, which is kind of sad, versus Vern, where Ernest and Harmony are just destroying Vern's house, and it is so off. You're going for something that's really sad to really insane, and it feels weird as hell.
Yeah, no, that I don't know if I dislike that, but it is really weird. If the movie was more sort of daring in its juxtaposition throughout, I'd probably be more into it, but it definitely feels unintentional.
For sure. I mean, it is just generally weaker, but the only other low point I could think of is the air traffic control trying to terminate the sleigh with extreme prejudice. Which just feels so out there.
I kind of like it because it is so weird. Because they pick him up on the radar, and then they're like, I guess he flies over some restricted airspace, and they send jets to destroy him, and then he gives them the slip. And it is a weird moment of extreme danger in a movie that's had pretty low stakes. I mean, except for the possible destruction of Christmas. But it doesn't also feels totally out of place.
For sure. So, we talked about our high points and low points. Let's discuss what we think is the biggest high point. I gotta pick from mine. What would you pick from yours?
The biggest high point. I mean, all mine are fairly minor. I think it's the pancakes. I think that's my favorite part.
Okay, we're going with a food-related one. Good choice. I think I'm gonna go with, I gotta stick to my guns and do an animal-related one. I like the snake-faced Ernest scene. They both sound valid. How are we gonna figure out which one's the best?
Well, you and I are deadlocked, so it's only appropriate that we go to our guest, who's definitely been here the entire time to contribute a lot to our conversation, for the tiebreaker. And I'm speaking, of course, of...
Drum roll.
The one and only Will Gaiman, author
Oh.
of American Wheel. God, wheels.
Well, tell us, Will, what do you think?
Wheel says the snakes, and also a bunch of stuff about the nature of stories. It was confusing, and I didn't understand any of it.
Oh, Will, you stay classy and continually on my side.
In the previous film that we discussed, we said that the high point of that was the turtles parachuting in to the Turtles song.
The high point is Ernest interacting with animals.
But do you? I think that the turtles is a higher high point than the snakes.
Oh, for sure, because it has all the elements to it.
All right, so that's going to stay our top high point for the Ernest franchise. It's currently those turtles.
Okay, let's go for top low point, or lowest low point. My choice is the pacing of the Arresting Santa versus Vern commercial.
My low point is that part where Ernest is mean to a kid.
What say you, Will Gaiman?
He agrees with me. It's Ernest being mean to that kid.
Well, there's a first time for every betrayal, and this is now.
He also said something about Ernest being real in the dreams of the stories of the real dreams of stories of Ernest. But I don't know what that means.
Will Gaiman, you sly trickster, you. I'm glad we have you on the show this one time, and maybe this one time only. So, do you think that is a lower low point than the one from Ernest Goes to Camp, which is what?
Cultural appropriation.
Ooh.
This, I think, is a tricky decision, because on a moral level, I think absolutely the cultural appropriation is worse. But that's also, like, a problem with a lot of movies, and with American culture in general, and a lot of art from before now, and also art from now. Whereas Ernest being mean to the kid is more specific to this movie and to the Ernest franchise. It runs counter to the conception of Ernest that we've worked up in the previous movie.
I agree with that, but also I do want to note this: Ernest Saves Christmas is not excused from that either. There is a certain point where Santa is lost and doesn't know what to do, and sits down with older black gentleman who gives him some wisdom on a bench.
You know what? I had almost completely blacked that out of my mind because it's so weird.
It's like a blink and you'll miss it scene, but it is weird inclusion.
It's so strange because Santa Claus is already a mystical mentor figure, and then he gets advice from a magical black man.
Mm-hmm.
So weird. You're right, though.
So I don't know if that affects your decision here.
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. I really don't know which way I fall. If I say that the kid is worse than being mean to the kid is worse than cultural appropriation, I don't want that to be read as me excusing that. But I think my argument would be that this is a more Ernest specific low point, and this is a podcast. This is a season about Ernest. So I think my vote is for Ernest betraying what we established as his essential nature to be mean to a kid.
Okay, I can agree with that. I mean, in general, whenever we pitch our perfect pitch of the movie that we're going to make, we're going to avoid a cultural appropriation because we are two fine gentlemen who would not stoop that low. So I think it's fair that we keep the low point specifically on Ernest.
All right.
Okay. So what is next? Where are we going from here?
To jail.
Does Ernest go somewhere else? Oh shit, he goes to jail?
In fact, yes. In fact, he does.
For the crime of saving Christmas?
Maybe. You'll have to tune in next week to find out.
I guess so. What do you think about Ernest Goes to Jail? Do you think that movie will blow us away?
I think it's going to be... I don't know if it's as good as Ernest Goes to Camp, but I definitely think it's going to be a step up from this. And I think by its very nature, it's Ernest Goes to Jail. It's going to have to put the focus back on our man, Ernest P. Worrell.
Well, we can all hope and dream. So until next time, listeners, remember, there is a right and wrong in the universe, and a distinction is not hard to make. You know what I mean?
All of you, Vern. But now you gotta move, Vern.